Boker Tov, Shavua Tov. Today's daf is daf Chaf. We'll start it with the Mishnah on the bottom of daf Yudtesom and Beis. And here we're talking about a person who accepted upon himself Nazirus when he was in Chutz La'aretz, and he fulfilled his Nazirus according to the Doraisa law, and he was Yotzi Yadei Naziroso. But now the Chachamim will penalize him because Tumas Eretz Ha'amimim. And we're going to see a machlokas here about the nature of Tumas Eretz Ha'amimim and the Knas. Misha Nazar Nazirus Harbe, he accepted upon himself a longer extended period of Nazirus, and he was in Chutzotz. Vehishlim es Naziruso. He concluded his days of Nazirus in Chutz La'aretz. Ve'achkach bo la'aretz. Now he comes to Eretz Yisrael, and he's ready to be makriv his karbonos, which he has to do like any Nazir who completes his Nazirus, even though he fulfilled his Nazirus in Chutz La'aretz. And therefore he has to come to Eretz Yisrael to be makriv his karbonos. Beit Shammai Omrim, Beit Shammai say that they imposed a penalty upon him, and he has to start a full Nazirus of Shloshim Yom when he comes to Eretz Yisrael. Ubeis Hillel Omrim Nazir Bitchili, has to start his entire Nazirus from scratch. And the reason for this is because the Rabbanan considered it as if he took upon himself Nazirus while he was in a Beis HaKvaros, as a result of Tumas Eretz Ha'amimim. And therefore, according to Beis Hillel, none of the days that he fulfilled and he counted towards his minyan Nazirus will count. And he has to start from the beginning. The Gemara is going to analyze this machlokas. The Mishnah tells us, Amaisa behilni hamalka, she was in Chutz La'aretz, sheholach b'na l'milchama, her son was on the front lines in a battle, and therefore she accepted upon herself the following neder v'yomra. She declared him, Avo im yavo b'ni min hamilcham b'shalom, if my son will return health, in a good health, from the milchama, eye nazira sheva shanim, I'll take upon myself 7 years worth of nazirus. Uba b'na min hamilcham, baruch Hashem, her son came back healthy, and she was mekayma neder v'oisa nazira sheva shanim. On the very last day of the 7 days, B'sov sheva shanim also la'aretz, she comes to Eretz Yisrael, she wants to bring her karbonos. Vorua Beis Hillel shetei nazira od sheva shanim acheros. And Beis Hillel, in line with their shita, rule that she has to start her nazirus from scratch, another 7 years. And that's a result of the knas that they imposed on a Nazir in Chutz La'aretz, that he should come to Eretz Yisrael and start fulfilling his Nazirus from scratch. So far we're up to 14 years of Nazirus, of Heleni Amalka. Ubesof Sheva Shanim Nitmeis. And at the end of the 7 years, that means towards the end of the 14 years of Nazirus, 7 of which she counted in Chutz La'aretz, 7 in Eretz Yisrael, Nitmeis. She contracted Tumah, and as a result, she is now Soseres Kol HaMinyan. And therefore she needs another 7 years of Nazirus Betara, of an Imtzeis Nazira, Esrim V'achas Shana. So all told, she would be a Nazira for 21 years. This before we get to Rabbi Yehuda. Now there's a note here in the name of Tosfos Rabbi Kivega, which is Rabbi Kivega's comment on the Mishnah. And he says that in this case, she does not bring a carbon tuma after she was metaheres es atzma b'tumazu, because she was nitmes after the malos of Yemei Nizra. And in such a case, once you fulfill the entire malos, if you contracted tumah, then you do not bring a carbon tumah. And again, we're dealing with the doraisa halach. On a doraisa level, she has completed on Nazirus in Chutz La'aretz. And the Chachamim could not say, well, we disregard your full-fledged complete fulfillment of Nazirus of the Malos in Chutz La'aretz, and therefore you have to bring a carbon in Eretz Yisrael, because that would violate the principle of Ein Koach B'Yad Chacham Lakar Dov Min HaTorah B'Kum Vaseh, and basically she'd be bringing Chulin Lazar. Now we get to Rabbi Yehuda in the Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda, Lo Hoysa Nazira El Arba'asrei Shana. She was only a Nazira for 14 years. And the Gemara is going to analyze this. Katani Reisha, it says in the beginning of the Mishnah, Beit Shammai Omrim Nazir Shloshim Yom. Beit Hillel Omrim Nazir B'tchila. Has to start his Naziris from the beginning. Lema shall we say B'haka Mifligi. This is the fundamental point that they're arguing about. Beit Shammai Savri, the question is whether Tumas Eretz Amavim is a duplicate of Tumas Mes. Are these Tumos identical? And then Afkamina is going to be something like Avir. So Beit Shammai hold Eretz Amamim, the Tumah that the Chachamim goes on Eretz Amamim, Mishum Avira Gozu. Even the Avir is included. So let's say someone came into Chutz La'aretz in an airplane, or what the Gemara calls Shida Tevo Migdal, and he never touched the ground of Eretz Amamim. And therefore, if he was not Nogea Be Gush offer in the actual offer of Eretz Yisrael, or Mahil, then on a Doraisa level, even if we would assume that there was Tumah there, he would not contract Tumah because he never actually came in contact with the earth. And the Chachamim made Gzeira that even the Avir of Eretz Amim is considered Tomei. So that even if you enter into the airspace of Eretz Yisrael, B'shida Tevu Migdal, then Mirabanan, you contract Tumah Mishum Avira. Now, since the Chachamim were so machmir in Tumas Eretz Amamim that they declared that even the Avir of Eretz Amamim is Tomei, therefore this Tumah is radically different than the paradigmic Tumah Doraisa of Tumas Mes, which requires Negia or Mahil al Mes, or being in an oil with a Mes. So therefore, Beit Shammai hold that we don't really have a problem of a toes, that people might think if we grant and recognize that the fulfillment of the Naziris and Chutz La'aretz, despite the Tumah of Chutz La'aretz, might come to think that in general, even in a Tumah Doraisa, you're only sosa, let's say, Shloshim Yom according to Beit Shammai. So Beit Shammai are not so nervous about it because they don't think that it's realistic that somebody would make such a toes and equate in his mind Tumas Eretz Amim with Tumah because they're so fundamentally different with one from the other. But and here we're on Daf Chav, Beis Hill, on the other hand, Savri, Mishum Gusha Gozroleh, that basically Tumas Eretz Amim is identical with Tumah Doraisa, and only someone who is Nogea, or at least Mahil on Gush offer of Eretz Amimim, which again we assume that in the Gush offer of Eretz Amimim there are bones of a deceased person. That's where the Chacham will go there, Chachamim will go there Tumah. But if you are only in the airspace of Eretz Amimim, Nichnas B'shida Teva Migdal, according to Beis Hillel, you would not contract Tumah. Now, Tumah of Eretz Amimim, because it requires either Negia B'gush offer or Mahil al Gush offer, is absolutely similar to Tumah Doraisa. So therefore the Chacham have to be more machmir to be sosa the entire minyan of Nazir, so that a person should not come to a mistaken conclusion that even if someone was nitma b'mes or b'kever mes, which is a Tumah Doraisa, he's not sosa the entire minyan of his Naziris, will let him get away with 30 days. So Basil would not have the luxury of allowing for that. And the Gemara rejects this. Lo, the Kuli Alma Sovrim, everybody agrees. That means even Beit Shammai would agree. Mishum Avira Gozroleh. I'm sorry. Even Beis Hill would agree that Mishum Avira Gozroleh. So what then is the machlokas Beis Hillel and Beit Shammai? Of course, we don't have really a problem with Beit Shammai because Beit Shammai Savri, Bistam Nazirus Kanisna, we should only impose a knas for the tomb of Chutz La'aretz of 30 days of Nazirus. And we're not choshish that somebody might say, well, even if it would have been Tumah Doraisa, it would only be Soser Shloshim Yom, because this tomb is so radically, fundamentally different than Tumah Doraisa in that it's Matami Be'avir. Beis Hillel Savri, even though he himself agrees that Tumas Eretz Amnim applies even to Avir, which means Shila Teva Migdal, but Kiknisna B'tchilas Nazirus. In other words, the level of chashash in Beis Hillel for the same exact reality as Beit Shammai was that much greater. He was more nervous about it, and we need that he begin his Nazirus from the get-go. And if he took upon himself 100 days in Nazirus, he got to start from day one, from ground zero. And this, despite the fact that this tomb of Eretz Amimim is so fundamentally different than Tumah Doraisa, in the fact that Tumas Eretz Amimim is Matamim Avira, but nevertheless, you know what? Not everybody is such a Talmud Chacham, and we have to be careful because perhaps someone who's not such a great scholar will come to the conclusion that this is a Tumah Doraisa, and it'll be Mekil, and it'll say that even for a Tumah Doraisa, all you need is a stira of Shloshim Yom. Therefore, they instituted a gzera that even in this Tumah of Eretz Amimim, it should be sosa the entire Nazirus as if it were Tumah Doraisa because of that possible toes. Maisa be Lady Amalko, etc., etc. And the Gemara says, the Gemara has the following suffix. Bishen nitmes aliba de Beit Shammai. Should we understand this story as a case where at the end of Hanazirus in Eretz Yisrael, which means the second set of Nazirus, then she contracted Tumah. She was therefore Soseres Minyan Hanazirus, and that's why she needs another 7 years. And then you might ask the following question. Now, all this we have to emphasize is going according to Rabbi Yehuda, who has a total of 14 years of her Nazirus. So now what happens is she comes to Eretz Yisrael after having fulfilled her Nazirus in Chutz La'aretz, and according to Beit Shammai, we're going to impose upon her an additional Nazirus of 30 days. And now, at the end of her Nazirus in Eretz Yisrael, she contracted Tumah. And now, because she accepted upon herself 7 years of Nazirus, she needs another 7 years of Nazirus. So the total number is going to be 14 years, according to Rabbi Yehuda, plus 30 days. Oh, Dilma, should we say, no, B'shalom nitmes, leave the Beis Hillel. Maybe the case that Rabbi Yehuda envisioned in his mind, he disagreed with Chacham about exactly what happened there in the case of Hilni Amalka. He understood that she had not contracted Tumah. And the reason why she was in Nazir for 14 years is because Rabbi Yehuda accepts the Shita of Beis Hillel, that with her arrival in Eretz Yisrael, she has to start her Nazirus one more time, a full 7 years. And now she has 14 years in Nazirus for Aliva de Beis Hillel. Tashmas, Gemara says, wait, look at our Mishnah. It says, also, La'aretz v'horu Beis Hillel shetehei Nazir od sheva shanim acheres v'chulei. At the end of the 7 years in Eretz Yisrael, she contracted Tumah, and therefore she was a Nazira for a total of 21 years. Rabbi Yehuda says, no, she only had 14 years. Isal kedaita b'shenitmeis, according to the first side in your suffix, that she was a Nazira for 14 years because she got a horah of 30 days, according to Beis Hillel, when she arrived in Eretz Yisrael, plus the 7 years that she accepted upon herself, and she contracted Tumah, so therefore she gets 14 years. But Ihachi, Rabbi Yehuda Omer lo hoisen Nazir al arba'asrei shana. How does Rabbi Yehuda suffice with 14 years? Arba'asrei shloshim yomi boile. He should have said that she would have to count an additional 30 days on top of the 14 years, because when she gets to Eretz Yisrael at the end of 7 years, she has to count another 30 days, according to Beis Shammai. Therefore, the Gemara concludes, like the second side in the Safek, that Rabbi Yehuda talked about a case where she was not Tmeah at all, and when she got to Eretz Yisrael at the end of 7 years, he paskined like Beis Hillel, and she was therefore instructed to fulfill another 7 years, and therefore, all told, she has 14 years, and that's it. Tanya Nami Hachi, we learned thusly in a Brisa, Rabbi Yehuda Omer Mishum Rabbi Eliezer, the Omar Kros Zos Torahs had Nazir, Shatora Omra, Ki Nitma Biyom Melos Torahs Nazir. So Tainlo Torahs Nazir. So this is the Shita of Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer holds that if a Nazir fulfilled his entire minyan of Nazirus, and then he contracted Tumah at the end of that Nazirus, then the halacha is that he's got to fulfill now only 30 days of Nazirus, because the Torah says that if he was Nitma on the day of his Malos, the last day of his Nazirus, Tainlo Torahs Nazir. Torahs Nazir means Stam Nazirus, which is Shloshim Yom. Now, Rabbi Yehuda is quoting Rabbi Eliezer, and we came to the conclusion, and now we're going to support that conclusion with this price that we're learning now, that Rabbi Yehuda holds that Hileni did not, in fact, contract Tumah, and they gave the Horah to Hileni of Beis Hillel, because if we're going to say that they gave the Horah of Beit Shammai, and the 7 additional years are because she was Nitma and she was Sasra Minyana, then since on the 30th day, on the last day of her Nazirus, she contracted Tumah, she's only Soseres Shloshim Yom, so she was Nazira only 7 years and 60 days, 30, 7, and another 30. So how could Rabbi Yehuda say that she was in Nazir for 14 years? We have no choice but to assume that Shalom Nitma, and the 14 years that she was in Nazir is because they gave her the Horah like Beis Hillel, and when she got to Eretz Yisrael, she has to go back again and count her Naziris from the beginning, another 7 years. And now we're on the Mishnah here on Daf Chav. Misha hoyu shtei kitei edim meidos oso. There are 2 sets of witnesses that testify to the effect that he accepted upon himself Nazirus. Now the Rishonim want to know, what does the person himself say? L'chora, it's not possible to say that he was Shosek, because why do we say, therefore, that there's no Nazirus Chal? We have a principle called Shtika Kodah. And we'll see that Beis Shammai here is going to say that he's not a Nazir at all. So therefore, the Rishonim interpret this in a number of different possible scenarios. Number 1, perhaps he was makrish both kitei edim. Number 2, he says Eidi Yodea, so there's no Shtika Kodah. Or number 3, he was Shosek, but the 2 kitos of edim came together at one time, and as we'll soon see, there was a discrepancy between the 2 kitos, and in such a case, there's no din of Shtika Kodah, because the reason why he was Shosek is because he said to himself, why do I have to be voice my objection here, since the Makish said so anyway? What was the nature of the Akasha? The Mishnah says, V'elu me'idim let's start again. Elu me'idim shenazar shtayim, v'elu me'idim shenazar chamesh. One kad of Edim testified that he took upon himself 2 Nazirios, and the second kind of Edim says, no, he took upon himself 5 Nazirios. Beit Shammai omrim nechel kol ha'edus. We have here a kasha between the 2 sets of Edim, so therefore we have to throw out all the Edim, because we don't know which Edim to rely upon. And therefore, v'ein kan Nazirus. Beis Hillel omrim yesh b'chal chamesh shtayim. on 2 years, on 2 Nazirios, there's no debate, there's no discrepancy, and therefore, Shiahei Nazir Shtayim. That bare minimum of 2 years of Nazir certainly was makabel on himself. Maybe he was makabel on himself 5 Nazirios, but certainly he was makabel on himself 2 Nazirios. And the Gemara says, Masnisin de Loki Haitana. The Mishnah is against the following Tana. Desani Rabbi Yishmael ben Oshel Rabbi Yochanan ben Brok Omer Lo nechleku Beit Shammai Beisil al Shtei Kitei Edim Achas Omer Shtayim V'Achas Omer Chamesh Yesh Bechal Chamesh Shtayim. Even Beit Shammai agree that if the 2 pairs of Edim agree, they have a common ground of two Nazirios, that's what it's going to be. So therefore, we can, in a sense, reconcile the discrepancy between the 2 pairs of Edim with regard to that 2 Nazirios Kabbalah. And even though we're sure that one of these two Kitos is certainly perjuring themselves, but nevertheless, since they both agree to one truth, one common truth, with regard to Shtei Nazirios, therefore, no matter which Kat of Edim is not telling the truth, we certainly have one Kat that testifies on 2 Nazirios. So what then, asks Rabbi Yishmael, is the machlokas between Beis Hillel and Beit Shammai? Aman nechleku al Kat achas. There are only 2 witnesses. Echad, one of the 2, Omer Shtayim. The Echad, the other one says Chamesh. Shebeit Shammai Omer nechleku edusam. This is certainly a case of hakashas ha'edus. One says this and the other says that. So we know that one of them is telling a lie, he's perjuring himself, and therefore we only have one aid. That we have 2 witnesses that testify that he accepted upon himself 2 Nazirios. So as far as 2 Nazirios is concerned, there's no discrepancy between the 2 Eidim, ein kan hakasha klal, and therefore he's chayav in 2 Nazirios. Now, here we have to introduce an additional point of the Chazon Yechezkel. If you remember, Rabbi Yechezkel Abramsky, who lived in Beit Fagan, came from he was the head of the Beis Din in England, and then he made Aliyah here. He wrote a massive work on the Tosefta, and he writes that you might ask the following question: how could Beis Hillel possibly reconcile 2 Eidim when one of them is certainly telling a sheker? And he answers, between tolim she'eno meshaker, we're going to assume that one of the 2 Eidim did not tell a lie, ela toeh, but rather he made a mistake. Now this makes sense if you think about the one who said that he only was makabel 2 Nazirios, maybe he made a mistake, and he didn't hear about the other 3. For example, let's say he said already Nazir, and that's all he heard, already Nazir. However, the other way around, to say that he heard 5 when he really heard 2, that's a bit of a stretch. Amar Rav, hakol modim v'modim. There's a case where even Beis Hillel say that you cannot reconcile the 2 Eidim, and that's the case of Mona. What does Mona mean? Mona means that they said this is the final number. So if one aid says the final number was 2, and the other aid said the final number was 5, then each one is excluding the other one. So the Gemara is going to explain what this means. Amalei Rav Chama Rav Chizda. Maika Amar. What does Rav have in mind when he says Mona? Elam, if he's talking about a case where Echad Omer Chamesh, V'lo Shtayim, if he added 2 extra words, and he negates the possibility of reconciling himself with the other aid by saying Ein Shtayim, V'lo Shtayim, V'echad Omer Shtayim V'lo Chamesh, so then Rav is not telling me anything new. Pshita, Dehoka Makshi Adadi. Each aid is makish explicitly his co-aid. And there's no chiddush yet to tell me that in that case, a dusa b'tela, and he's not a Nazir at all. Ella, but rather, what was the intention of Rav? What was the scenario that he had in mind? Echad Omer Achas Ushtayim. The Echad Omer Sholosh Arba V'Chamesh. So here's where Rav comes up with a chiddush. There's no explicit contradiction between the Eidim, but Rav is teaching us that since the Eidim counted the Nazirius 1, 1, 1, Achas, Shtayim, Achas, Shtayim, Sholosh, Arba, Chamesh, sounds like Hazoya on Yom HaKippurim. So it's as if each Eid was saying that it was Achas Ushtayim, Velo Sholosh, Arba, Chamesh. And the second Eid is saying he accepted upon himself Sholosh, Arba, Chamesh, Velo, Achas, V'Shtayim. So by the fact that he counts it out one by one, each aid counts it out one by one, each aid is being machish the other aid. And therefore, according to Rav, Beis Hillel would concede to Beit Shammai that the aidus is batel. And there's akosha here, there's no way of reconciling two aidim, and therefore there's no kabbalas aidus, kabbalas nazir, sorry.